experiences in the last 1 year at TVS Motor, we have been doing a lot of POCs to understand how can we use generative AI to create top line and bottom line impact. And basis of those learnings, I'll share with you what kind of considerations that we had to take into account, in our journey. A quick reference to, this presentation is really about the considerations that data leaders, CIOs, CDOs needs to make as they successfully scale GenAI. By enterprise, I'm referring to companies who use generative AI to solve business problems. I'm not referring to enterprises that build GenAI products. And then I am not going to be talking about technical details around, how do you fine-tune or orchestrate a model, right? So from my personal experience as well as talking to my colleagues, one of the challenges that we face increasingly and have been facing is the chairman, the CEO, the business leaders are becoming increasingly impatient with us now. This growing impatience is largely stemming from this bridge between the promise that they hear from a lot of literature, a lot of news about what generative AI can do, versus the speed at which generative AI adoption is taking place at their respective enterprises, as well as quantifiable, tangible business benefits that's being seen at the workplace. So I just happened to write a prompt to DALL-E, which is an image generator with OpenAI, and that's the image that it threw in terms of the gap that data leaders and CDOs and CIs are having to deal with and setting expectations with the business leadership. One of the things that's becoming apparent is that in this journey, a lot of enterprises have started doing a lot of POCs. And now that fatigue is visible. So the leadership is asking, okay, you have done 50 POCs, 60 POCs, 70 POCs. Where is the incremental business value? BCG in their recent survey stated that 2/3 of the executives are largely dissatisfied with the pace at which AI and generative AI is converting into tangible business value, and that's what the data leaders and the AI leaders in the companies need to solve for. When it comes to numbers, that's what this says, right? Majority of the companies around us in India and across the globe are working on a lot of pilots. But when it comes to translation of those pilots to scalable implementations and sustainable business value generation, that's where the divide is. And that's the problem statement that I want to talk about today. So if I have to summarize, basis what I've read, what I'm experiencing at work as well as discussions with my colleagues in the industry, there's a concern that the CEO and the business leaders are facing, and then that translates into the concerns that CIOs and CDOs face at work, right? So CEOs and business leaders are largely worried about three things. There's a lot of uncertainty around how much of incremental business value that's going to come from the investment, how much time it's going to really take to be able to get that value sustainably. And in a majority of the companies, there isn't a clear translation of company's strategic roadmap to, how does that translate into a strategic roadmap for GenAI implementation? So while that's their problem statement, the problem statement for CIOs and CDOs is really, is the data set that gets generated at source, the data set that gets managed, is that ready for scaling up generative AI? If you have built a solution, have you enabled the right architecture to do necessary integrations, easy integrations with your existing infrastructure? Doing POCs is kind of easy, but if you have to scale it up, it requires certain degree of technical maturity that you need to be able to handle. And do you have that skill set to be able to handle that complexity? Um, a lot of times while POCs are done, uh, you know, ability to instrument your solution to be able to measure incrementality generally is an afterthought, but incrementality measurement should be built in design. And a lot of times, um, data leaders and AI leaders struggle to be able to, systematically measure incremental value. So how do you instrument that? Gen AI is expensive, right? So how do you uh, consciously work on strategies to manage the cost of implementation, the running cost? And then, how do you work with your cybersecurity, data security teams to ensure that AI security is being taken care of even before you go live with, go live with implementation? So those are the kind of challenges that um, you know, s- the data leadership faces today. Um, what I want to highlight is that while at the outset it seems like a technical solution, while it is a technology solution, but that's not sufficient, right? If we want to be able to do fast implementations and sustainable implementations, then we need to worry about not just technology, but what changes that needs to be made at your enterprise in terms of processes, as well as in terms of people practices, in terms of defining roles of people. But on top of all the three, how does the AI strategy fits well with the company's strategy overall, right? So, so I will talk about what do leaders need to do about technology, but I wanted to consciously start with, what do we need to do from a people and process perspective, right? So basically, these are the 9 things that I'm going to be talking about over the next 10 minutes, that what do we need to do in terms of people, process, and technology. So we're going to quickly go through them. So the first thing is a realization amongst, and a level set amongst the data leaders and business leadership that the CIO and the CDO organization are not the champions, they are the enablers, right? Um, unless there is a clear understanding that this innovation is championed by CEO's office, marketing and sales leaders, um, this is going to become a problem, because if you fail, it's your problem. If you succeed, maybe the credit is going to be taken by business leadership. So the ownership needs to be led by the champions. The CIOs and the CDOs absolutely need to enable the right platforms, the right governance and the processes, but they need to identify champions who need to do a few stuff. So for example, the marketing and the sales leadership needs to re-evaluate their OKRs, their goal sheets, and Gen AI adoption needs to become, certain weightage in their goal sheets. The data leader needs to work with the champions to be able to ensure that AI adoption and AI strategy prominently figures in the company's strategy and mission, um, which should automatically translate to an AI commitment in the annual reports, right? So that's step one. Um, so while the last step was really how does the CIO and the CDO work with the external departments within the enterprise to make that shift, the CIO and the CDO needs to make shifts internally as well. Right now, if you look at traditional companies like TVS, consumer goods, non-digital companies, the typical CIO organization is heavily indexed on 50-60% staffing around software engineering, cloud, testing. The percentage of resourcing or the effort and the investment that you do towards data engineering, data science, data quality, observability is usually 1/4, and that needs to change, right? So what you see on your graph is the blue bar is what you generally see. 2/3 of the investment is testing, software engineering, but with generative AI, software development lifecycle is quickly going to become autonomous or AI assisted, and that's why the CIO org needs to start changing the mix of how much weightage do they give to different skill sets, right? On top of it, they need to start making investment, or we need to start making investment in new skill sets. So AI integration specialists are roles that are coming up. Prompt engineering, AI still continues to have AI and human feedback loop. So AI human collaboration managers, data quality experts. It's a long list, but what I wanted to emphasize is that the CIOs and the CDOs need to change the mix, as well as make investment in bringing in new skill sets with the existing team, as well as bringing in lateral talent. Right? A lot of these skill sets are not easily available in the market, so they need to find ways and do partnerships to be able to understand how do you grow some of these skill sets organically. The second change that we typically do and have started doing is changing job descriptions, right? Solution architects, product managers, software engineers, DevOps, they do have a classical job description, which is very, very software and digital led, and they need revision, right? So solution architects should not just worry about enterprise architecture, but how do you integrate generative AI to the existing enterprise and cloud architecture? Product managers need to start using generative AI for research, testing, and management. Software engineers, software engineering leaders, need to enable generative AI in the entire dev testing and deployment lifecycle, right? Cybersecurity needs to start worrying about AI security. Data privacy needs to worry about AI privacy. So all these changes needs to happen now, not in the future, because that's how you are going to do a sustainable scaling. That's going to be there for long. So while these three aspects are on the people side, let's jump towards the process part of the change. So Gen AI strategy needs to really bank on these three important steps, right? There's so much of use cases, there's so much of models being launched every week, every month. We as leaders can't boil the ocean, right? So step one, ruthless prioritization. There's a lot of literature available. There's a lot of literature available around what are those specific domain-specific use cases where generative AI already works well, but there are many general-purpose use cases where it does not work well. Assimilate all of that information and make few big bets. Don't go after everything. Over-index on viable domain-specific use cases, right? That gives high level of accuracy, relevance, very, very high level of ROI with less investment, faster GTM. And so while you can continue to invest in large language models, but you need to start indexing on domain-specific and SRMs. And finally, risk management, right? A very primary role is business continuity for data leaders. Now imagine you have built a scalable solution using Azure AI services, and at some point in time, just happen to taking this example, if there's anybody from Microsoft, please pardon me. They increase prices, and they increase prices prohibitively that your scalable commercial viability goes for a toss, right? What if the models that you use, third-party models, essentially goes through some architectural change that you can no longer use it. In order to be able to manage all of this, you need to be able to do platformization of generative AI that is modular, that is cloud agnostic, that is model agnostic. Because, the underlying requirement is after you have scaled your solutions, irrespective of what changes that might happen at a component level with the solution providers, your show must go on. And I think that's why those principles needs to be built in architecturally on your platforms before you scale up. The next one is about establish or adopt generative AI governance frameworks, right? So the liability for when something goes wrong with generative AI, right? Generative AI is about generation of outputs by AI agents. the liabilities are really large, and that's why governance becomes very, very important. Most companies, including TVS Motors, have invested in AI governance, data governance capabilities in-house. And if you don't want to invest internally, you need to keep this into consideration. Of course, you can take services from external partners, consultants. Accountability, data management, transparency. How do you handle incident management once it's in production? Especially it's a large-scale deployment, are things that you need to establish as you scale. There are many frameworks that are already at play, and these are just the references for you. The next thing is about, all of you in the room know that large language models or language models can do a variety of stuff, right? They can do content generation, Q&A, reasoning, summarization, and then literature will tell you that there are host of metrics to be able to evaluate efficacy of those models. But when it comes to reality, you need to have a priority order, a pecking order of what are your top KPIs that you could worry about. So for example, if your domain-specific solution is an HR assistant for screening resumes and scheduling interviews, fairness probably is a higher order KPI than relevance and hallucination rate. But then if you are building a customer care bot which handles grievances, ability to manage toxicity is probably the top priority over latency and relevance, right? So all of them are important, but you need to have a priority order in mind, right? So then I'll finally move to the third piece about technology. So AI is about, how do you manage your data, right? And that's why consciously the data leaders and the IT leaders needs to ensure that right fundamentals are in place to ensure that the data that you generate or create is set up, managed for generative AI. Data quality at source is becoming very important. Work with your product owners, work with your engineering leaders, software engineering leaders to make sure data quality is managed at source. Data quality management through labeling, annotation is a capability that you need to invest in. There's a lot of automation involved. When you start managing large volumes of data, you need to have strategies to be able to do bias management and mitigation. So while that's on data readiness, the other hurdle that we typically face, especially with traditional enterprises, is that you have your solution. Now, how do you do an easy integration with existing cloud infrastructure, data infrastructure? There are 2 or 3 typical approaches. So one is model to data approach. So you have built your model, or you have your model, you deploy your model in your existing cloud infrastructure. So the learning and the inferencing takes place in your ecosystem. In the long run, that's a safer and a preferred strategy, as against data to model approach where you're sending your data outside to a third-party platform or an ecosystem. There are risks around data privacy, cost management, etc. And I come from automobile, and there are use cases getting discussed about GenAI at edge, whether it's mobility or manufacturing, and you need to be able to work with partners who allows you to enable generative AI at edge. Platformization of generative AI, right? So I'm showing 2 distinct images on this slide, right? I mean, as you start pilot, all you need is a model API, right? But then when you start scaling up, you need to start investing into different types of platform components, and that's the investment that we need to make. Just to give you an example, this is a reference platform architecture that our teams have set up for LLM RAG implementations, and you can see there are 8 different components and layers. So there's caching that you need to establish to be able to manage latency and cost, input and output guardrails, retrieval layer, knowledge base. So all of these components needs to be seen as platforms, because unless you do, you won't be able to manage multiple use cases at scale, right? For you to be able to do horizontal deployments, they have to work like a software component, and that's how you scale and that's how you manage scale. So this is a illustration of if you platformize your generative AI stack, these are the levers that gives you the impact. There's tremendous benefits around operational efficiency. How do you reuse your data, faster time to market, cost optimization, security, etc. I mean, in a nutshell, platformization gives you all these benefits at scale. And finally, as a data leader, you need to keep an eye on cost. It has to make sense. It's a dhanda after all. You can't implement solutions that's not making bucks for the company, and that's why you need to always keep an eye on how do you manage costs, right? There are many levers at play for you to be able to manage costs, whether you select an open source or a closed source model. How do you enable caching? Should you use a small language model or a large language model? How do you do token management? But just wanted to let you know that these levers needs to be utilized because it does three things for you. It gives you as the data leader and your organization a much longer runway for experimentation. It gives you the license to scale, and this is how you start getting ROI, right? So that's it. I mean, that's my presentation, guys. More than happy to take any questions that you have.